Hello, and welcome to another edition of Ask the Professor, where we respond to your questions on everything from political philosophy to current events to culture, all those things that concern us in living together as citizens.
All right, and here's a good one. Asking a recent Weather Network article made outlandish claims about man-made climate change, including that average summer temperatures in Ottawa would rise from 20 to 27 degrees Celsius by 2200, unless by giving up fossil fuels we limited it to 24 degrees. How does one counter such outlandish claims? And that was from Robert.
That's an excellent question, to which my answering part is one makes a documentary. Yes, please visit my website, follow the links, make a contribution, because I am producing the Environment a True Story to try to deal with this kind of stuff, including even more outlandish claims like James Hansen's that the oceans might boil, that the Earth will turn into Venus, because it's amazing the stuff that gets said. And another outlandish thing about that assertion that Robert quoted was that this will happen by 2200.
Precisely. By 2200.
Yeah,
maybe to 27 degrees.
March of 2201. That they know exactly what's going to happen in the future. And one of the ways that I'm going to attempt to contest these arguments is by showing the past history of the Earth's climate. Not just getting into the weeds with the alarmists about what's happened since 1970, but going back to the Victorian period, going back to the medieval warm period, going back to the Minoan warm period, going back to the coming of the glaciations 2.8 million years ago, going back to the emergence of the major orders of mammals 50 to 55 million years ago, going back to the first appearance of multi-celled life in the Cambrian explosion 550 million years ago, and showing that we know quite a bit about what the climate has done. We know that the Earth has typically been warmer than it is today, roughly 10 degrees centigrade warmer, without being hostile to life. At the time of the dinosaurs, the Earth was a beautiful place with these astounding life forms that continue to fascinate us. It wasn't a wasteland of floods and wildfires and droughts and all this kind of stuff that Al Gore is predicting, his so-called nature hike through the Book of Revelations, that some people like Leonardo DiCaprio claim we're actually living through now. So I called him Leonard again. His name is Leonardo. I do actually know that. So you keep your cool. Let them rant and rave. We're not going to rant and rave. You also look at the evidence, which, funnily enough, they almost never do. The alarmists have virtually nothing to say about almost anything that's ever happened. At one point, they tried to erase the medieval warm period, which doesn't count as treating the evidence in a rational manner. You show them that if you look just at what the Holocene is, the name of the period since the glaciers last retreated. I'm not going to say since the end of the last ice age, because in fact, an ice age is defined as a period with significant polar ice. We're still in one. We're just in a warm period. But you see that there's this kind of cycling trend that's actually pointing downwards. And with the sun going into a period of limited activity, the next few decades may well end up cooler, possibly uncomfortably cooler.
Some people will look silly if that happens. So.
Yeah, we will. We'll look like Wright Burks. There's an old Twilight Zone episode, The Midnight Sun, in which a person lives in a world where the Earth's been knocked off its orbit and is spiraling closer to the sun, and the temperature's going through the roof, and there's no water and so on. And then it turns out it's a dream, the fever breaks, and we discover that the opposite has happened, that the Earth's been knocked away from the sun and is plunging to freezing temperatures. We're going to be far worse off if the glaciers come back than we will be if the temperature goes up by 2 or 3 degrees. But the main point about these claims is they're based on computer models that cannot even explain the past. They can't even explain the very recent past unless they fiddle with things like aerosols. Oh, there are more aerosols. That gets rid of that bit of cooling. Oh, there are fewer aerosols. That explains that temperature spike. They can't do anything with the Little Ice Age, the medieval warm period. They just don't model, they don't explain the past. And they say, oh, they predict the future, so we know it's going to be 27 degrees in the year 2200. You deal with it courteously, but with a smile, because this is a parody of science. And then you get serious about making sure that we don't base policy on a parody of silence. Retain your sanity, retain your manners, and stand your ground. This is not science.
All right. Well, let me ask a follow-up question to that one, because I don't follow all the scientific ups and downs. But, hey, what about the argument that since we don't really know what our impact is, that we should be careful? What about that? What about replying to the alarmists by saying, listen, I'm not sure I believe everything that has been printed about climate change and all the alarming scenarios, but yeah, maybe we should be more careful because who knows what our impact is. How about that? Is there room for that kind of position in your ideal view?
Oh, there certainly is. We should be careful. We are stewards of the environment, and we have been careless in the past. We have done things we should not have done. We have polluted the air and the water, and then we smartened up. The air in North American cities is far cleaner. You can't believe the pictures from Los Angeles in the 40s and 50s. You can't see through the smog. It looks like a place like Harbin, China today. There's a photo that'll be in the documentary of the Optimists Club of Los Angeles meeting in 1954 wearing gas masks. I'm not sure what they were optimistic about.
Or what the pessimists were wearing.
But we also must be careful about this. Energy poverty is one of the worst curses afflicting the poor in parts of the third world today. People who cannot get enough energy to get clean water up from the ground, to cook their food properly, are burning wood and dung inside huts, and they are breathing in particulate matter. They are ruining their eyesight. They are poisoning their kids. So to get rid of fossil fuels, with all the benefits they bring us, has very serious consequences. And we must be careful not to do it without knowing what we're doing. There's even an argument some people have made, and this takes us into the world of worrying uncertainty, but that the current levels of atmospheric CO2 are astonishingly low by historical standards, dangerously low. If CO2 levels in the atmosphere were to fall to 150 parts per million, they'd gotten down to about 280 before they started to go back up, there would be a massive die-off of plant life. We know this. We also know that greenhouse owners pump CO2 into greenhouses to about 4 times current atmospheric levels, 3 or 4 times, to make plants grow more lushly. It seems that the green revolution was driven in part by increasing CO2 in the atmosphere. But that doesn't mean it's safe to say, oh yeah, we should alter the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere. The thing is, it's not at all clear that we are altering it. You say, oh, but it's going up. Everybody knows that. Yes, it is going up. But historically, atmospheric CO2 tends to rise when the planet warms, not the other way around. There is a certain correlation between CO2 and temperature, it seems, over about the last 800,000 years, not over longer periods, but temperature's leading the dance. When the oceans get warmer, they give off CO2. When the oceans get cooler, they absorb CO2. And so it may be that in a cooling world, if we're offsetting it at all, it's helping keep agriculture and natural plant growth flourishing at a time when it otherwise wouldn't. And if plants have more CO2, they can grow in drier, colder areas because they need fewer holes in their leaves to let in the CO2, which also lets out water vapor. So there are all these things that are going on here. But when we have a situation where we don't know as much as we'd like to know, and we don't know as much as we'd like to know about climatic processes, caution means not leaping madly onto our horse and riding off in all directions. And this idea of shutting down use of fossil fuels when we have no idea what impact it would have on the environment, but we know that it would have a disastrous impact on humanity, particularly those parts of it that don't live in the cities of the first world. We shouldn't do it. Because to condemn millions of people to misery and even death on the basis of an absolutely unproven theory, in fact, a theory that contradicts the facts, would be an act of consummate rashness. Yes, we're stewards of the environment. Yes, we should not play God when it comes to the climate, nor should we simply hurl our trash anywhere we feel like. But we must safeguard our sanity if we're to safeguard the planet.
Yeah, that's my position. There's so much we don't know. There's no need to panic, and there's certainly no need to be blithe and just say, well, we don't need to change anything. It's just, there's so much you don't know. You should be careful either way.
Exactly, yes. Caution is that Aristotelian prudence between rashness and timidity, and that's where we need to be. If you're enjoying these videos, please visit my website. That's www.johnrobson.ca. Make a contribution to help sustain us in our work generally, and if you're concerned about climate change alarmism, make a contribution to help us produce the documentary, The Environment: A True Story. It will be out this fall.